Welcome to Citizen Assembly Thunderdome, where we test ideas and hone debate skills in a real-life social political arena with the goal of holistic balance. If you'd like to participate, find out how in our podcast description. Let's start with a round of introductions from our panelists. We've got about 30 seconds apiece to tell our listeners a little bit about ourselves and what's going on in our mind at the present moment. So my name is Megan, and I am from Texas, but I'm in Arizona right now. And I am actually really excited about today's discussion. It's all about feminism versus femininity. So I'm excited about that. And Stacy, would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Stacy Gustafson. I split my time between Northern Michigan and Southwest Texas. My main focus is holistic community problem solving, and I too am very excited about this topic. Thanks, Megan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stacy, for being here. Dan, welcome. Would you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Dan Bader. I'm from Chicago. I retired from Chicago Department of Public Health in 2016. My interests are public health, mental health. I also have quite an interest in biowarfare and the current COVID-19 vaccination situation, which we're all, well, at least in my mind, we're going through. Yes.
Yeah, super interesting concept, Dan. I've looked a little bit into it too. It's pretty disturbing what's happening. Ilya, welcome. Would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Ilya, and what's on my mind is the conversation I missed and tried to reconstruct what was being talked about and like what I've missed.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Ilya. So, Green Party for you, Michigan Regent. Please introduce yourself and your name as well. I think it's the first time we're meeting.
Yeah, no. My name is Michael. I ran last year for region of the University of Michigan.
Awesome.
And I didn't think of myself as officially a panelist. I just saw on the message board that there was a forum happening tonight. I thought I'd check in. So.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. And Alex, would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. My name is Alex Kratz, and I'm interested in science and technology, and I look forward to tonight's discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we have a little bit of a smaller group tonight, so introductions are done. We're going to move on to today's presentation, and today I'll be presenting my idea, which is actually called The Folly of the Feminist. And it's been written up to share with others in Agora, which is the worldwide stock market of ideas, which you can find at agora-ilp.org. Agora is an online platform where people from around the world can turn their ideas into policy to build a better world. So I will start screen sharing my idea and then proceed with the reading. It's going to be pretty interesting because the only women here are Stacy and myself. So we'll see. I think this is something men will probably be more on board with, but we'll see. Stacy, would you mind enabling screen sharing with me if possible? Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we will begin. Okay, the follies of the feminist. Feminism is a movement that on the surface appears as though it's advocating for women's rights and equality. However, when you dive deeper into it, you see that it's not so much about equality as it is superiority. Feminism is not concerned with women establishing security in their femininity, but rather in obtaining power over men, which inevitably leads to the destruction of society. Approximately 150 years ago, a singular man possessed more buying power than a working couple does today combined. So today, you have both mom and dad who go to work for somebody else, forcing the children to be raised by strangers and government institutions called schools or daycares. Mom isn't at home anymore to raise the children as she pleases, and her most dearest work has been snatched away from her. She's no longer a wife, but she's a partner. As she's wished, she's proven that she can do all things that men can do, but she forgot to ask the most important question: why would she want to? Feminists believe that men and women are equal. They advocate higher pay for women and equal opportunities. They push for social justice and recognition. Above all, they push for power. Instead of supporting their male counterparts, they want to completely do away with them as leaders, which is suggested by popular feminist terms like smash the patriarchy or the future is female. Here are a couple of the follies of the feminist, and we get here because the ideal feminist fails to see that her or his ideals are going against their nature, and all problems arise due to an estrangement of nature, because there are male feminists that exist, so they're definitely included in this as well. So the first folly of the feminist is her belief that men and women are equal. Men and women are not equal. It's not about who's better than the other. It's that men and women have distinct roles that should be honored. Men are natural providers and leaders, while women are natural supporters and nurturers. Together, they can lead as kings and queens in their own lives and have dominion over all things as nature intended. The second folly of the feminist is the lack of respect that she has for herself. So imagine a situation where a woman is walking down the street with short shorts and a crop top. So she passes by a group of males who holler at her. The woman has been conditioned to blame the men for their behavior rather than assess her own situation. Men are driven by vision, so it's in their nature to desire a woman sexually. So they will always stare at a half-naked woman because nature doesn't change, and it never will. So the woman should, understanding her nature of men, dress appropriately out of respect for herself, because a woman who's secure in her femininity knows her value. She understands that she is man's greatest gift and her body is his greatest desire. So she isn't willing to give herself to just anyone, but she saves herself for the man who has proven himself to her, because only then will the man truly respect her, and only then will she really respect herself. The third folly of the feminist is her advocacy for unsolicited sex. So a common feminist belief is it's my body and I can do what I want. I can sleep with whoever I want to, whenever I want to. And sure, a woman can sleep with whoever she wants to, whenever she wants to, but every time she sleeps with a new person, it makes it harder and harder for her to truly form a pair bond with another in the future, because she's already given herself away to so many people. She's formed all of these soul ties. Now, the fourth folly of the feminist is her lack for a want of children. So while she engages in sexual activity frequently, she doesn't want children. She'd rather hustle hard, get a degree, and launch a career than raise a family. So she engages in forms of Planned Parenthood to stop the life from forming inside of her, while she goes out and buys a pet, such as a dog or a cat, to take care of, when in reality, all she wants are children. The reality is that most people are lost, and unfortunately, it's not their fault. We've all been raised in a society that never taught women how to be proper women or men to be proper men. So how shall we expect them to know how to carry themselves? Knowing thyself is the foundation to a prosperous life and a true connection to yourself and the world around you. Feminism, above all, has nothing to do with femininity. Being strong and independent are masculine traits. True femininity is expressed in that of a virtuous woman. The virtuous woman sees herself as worthy. She carries herself with integrity, and she knows the value that she brings to the table. She understands her purpose, and rather than give herself to anyone and everyone, she waits for the man that God ordained for her. The man she can truly submit to, for submission simply means to get behind one's mission. Submission is actually a beautiful thing if you think about it. It allows a woman to bask in her femininity and rest in the truth of who she is, a beautiful woman, an amazing wife, a wonderful mother, and a powerful leader right alongside her husband. Though she is fully capable of providing for herself if necessary, she allows herself to be taken care of by a man who truly loves, cares for, and protects her. In exchange for his protection, she fulfills her role as homemaker, mother, and his biggest supporter. The man gives her a house, and she gives him a home. Together, they rise to the top and become something they would have never been apart. Mother and father, king and queen, husband and wife. Okay, that is the completion of the idea. So just show of hands, who is in general support of this idea? Okay, myself, Stacy, Dan's kind of at half and half. And then, okay, Michael's at half and half. So Ilya and Alex are abstaining, is that correct? Okay.
I don't agree with the idea.
Okay, Alex agrees with the idea. Okay, cool. So we have
No.
Stacey.
I don't agree with the idea.
Okay, Alex doesn't agree with the idea. Okay, Alex doesn't agree. Stacy agrees. I agree. Dan, Ilya, and Michael are half and half. So and now I actually just put this idea in Agora, so I'm supporting it, but is anybody supporting that idea in Agora? Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and move into discussion. So would anybody like to start us off? Stacey.
Wow, that was full of a lot of stuff. I will just stick with one right now. Okay, so I totally understand the idea of we're different, not one better than the other, and we're talking about a spectrum here. But I feel like there could be a woman on the spectrum who just feels more on the male end of the spectrum and may actually legitimately want to pursue those male kind of things, male kind of what you would consider and have listed as male traits. So is that a feminist, or is that just a person, a human being on the male end of the spectrum?
Right. That's a great question. So if anybody wants to speak, just comment hand up or raise your hand and we'll go to you, but I'll go ahead and answer. That's a great question. I should distinguish between that because, yeah, it's if a woman wants to pursue more masculine traits, then that's totally fine. She can live her life like that. And maybe she doesn't identify as a feminist, although her lifestyle might relate to what the feminists push. In that case, the woman would just have to understand, she'll have to look at her life in the long term. If she wants to pursue a career, provide for herself, get a college degree, do all of these things, then she will pursue the life of a man and she'll have to think about the consequences. So maybe she won't ever have children and maybe she'll, live alone in an apartment with her dog. And if that's what she wants, then there's nothing wrong with that. But also the point is too, is that it's not like it's all black and white. It's not like this dude is only masculine and this woman is only feminine. It's about like the spectrum does exist. So some men will have some feminine traits and some women will have masculine traits. So it's not to say that the woman has to be entirely submissive, but it's that she's getting behind the mission of the man, and she can also pursue her own ventures within that, if that makes sense.
Two things. It seems like you have a personal bias that says what the man is pursuing is kind of a detrimental thing. It's not to be wanted, and then that the woman doesn't a natural woman does not herself have a mission.
No, that's not what I'm saying. So actually, that's a great point. So the woman should understand her mission and it should be the same or very similar to the mission of the man. So I use the example, I'm not super religious or anything, but I think there's a lot of wisdom in the Bible that teaches how to live. So for example, the story of Adam and Eve, they did not come together until they were each complete in their individuality. So Adam had something going for him. He was in a position to provide for Eve. Eve came, she was made of Adam, so to be his helper, but she also had her own purpose and her own mission, and their vision was in synchrony, so it worked together. So as a woman, we just naturally are nurturers, supporters, providers. We're great at that, and so it makes sense to get with the man who shares the same vision as we are, so that way we can move forward together. Because having purpose is essential. There's a lot of women who don't ever find purpose, and actually that's kind of how they fall into the feminist trap, so to say. So purpose is important for both. Did that answer? Okay. Awesome. Anybody else want to jump in? Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, I think sort of along the lines of what Stacey was pointing out, for me, it's more about the option to pursue these sorts of ideals. Like you've outlined what's essentially your subjective ideal reality of how people would pair bond. And I read your other Igora post on feminism. And in all of this writing, it seems that this is sort of the ideal case that should be aspired to. But I'd like to know your thoughts on why this ideal case doesn't seem to have manifested itself even prior to the conception of feminism in sort of the early 1900s, right? Or at least modern feminism, right? So if feminism is the issue in why these things aren't happening, why weren't they happening before that started?
Okay, great questions. I'll look forward to responding to that. But before myself is Dan.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts. So, the context, the historical material context of that men and women are socialized into, I think, is significant. Um, what you're putting forth is a certain vision, which is rooted to some large degree, really, in the kind of hardwired masculine and feminine nature. Not to say that everybody has is kind of a mixed bag in terms of what you might call masculinity or femininity. People are different. But there's a certain kind of socialization, in the United States, for example. In post World War II United States, the socialization was very, very clear, kind of like what you're talking about, Megan, in a certain way. But of course, as you moved into the late 1960s in the United States, there was the civil rights movement, the women's movement. You had all of these kind of movements where people were looking to break free of the stereotypes and the oppression. So over the many decades, a lot of things have evolved. And look, for example, I'm tangenting a little bit, but I want to. So back, in the mental health world, which I'm very familiar with. Let's remember that as far as sexuality goes, up until, I don't know when it was, maybe about 74 or 75, somewhere like that, homosexuality and any other kind of sexual preference that doesn't serve the purpose of, heterosexual reproduction was diagnosed as a mental disorder. And of course that was another movement which, all of these movements were going forward. And in some ways where we are today, I think that, it was, certainly in the 90s and 80s, 90s and so on, in the United States, we have a very large Christian, more fundamentalist type of community. It's very large. And anybody who's socialized there is going to have a very different version than somebody who's socialized into, a more decadent, big city, urban environment. I'm using the word decadent, but you know what I'm talking about. And so I think that those socialization environments play a big role into how men, women, and everybody views themselves. And I wondered if you could give a little bit of context to where how you've been socialized, actually.
Sure. Super interesting point. It actually kind of goes into the answer I was going to give to Alex as well. So, well, first I want to touch on, so why is feminism an issue now? And, how did we get here? So in 1903, I believe, there was a man named Edward Ross. He was a key education reformer, eugenicist. He was up there. He was from Columbia University, and he wrote in his book Social Control, which actually was, and it was in 1901, my bad, not 1903. He wrote that plans are underway to destroy family, church, and community and replace them with education, mass media, and propaganda. So feminism is not actually the core issue. It's just a part of the destruction and the demoralization of the society, because I've used this example many times before, but any successful community that's thrived, communities in pre-colonial America, how the hunter and gatherers live, how one of the cities in Dedham, Massachusetts lived, the foundation of those communities begin with an individual, a strong, complete individual. So let's say in this case, it's a man complete in his individuality, then marries woman who's also complete in her individuality, and together they have a family. So two complete individuals come together and have a big family. And now you have, they had a lot of kids back then, 5 to 15. So let's say you have 10 complete individuals in your family, then you actually bind with other like-minded families, and together you build a strong community like the Amish, which are still in practice today. And those strong communities are almost impossible to control by an outside force. Now, our government has been writing about this for centuries, actually. About their goal has been to take the authority away from the family and replace it with the state. That's why they're making men and women equal and partners. It's like the Brave New World society, to where everybody belongs to everybody else. So kids are raised in state institutions, people go work for outside corporations, and it all is to decentralize or deconstruct the family, because when you deconstruct the family, you deconstruct the community, and now they're deconstructing the individuals. So it's all a control thing. The people in power actually get more control this way. And what we're actually seeing is a progression away from nature. So like you mentioned, Dan, it started about 1950s. We have the feminist movement coming, and people feel oppressed, so to say. But I don't actually know if that's true, if they really did feel oppressed, or if that was propaganda as well. Because what they've done essentially is taken us all away from nature. So this is kind of a fact. I mean, it's really, whether you want to live as people in nature do in our lives today is totally up to you. But in nature, they eat raw meat. So I've talked about that a lot of times. So if we choose to not eat raw meat today, that's fine. You just won't be as healthy, because that's how they eat in nature. So that's why we still have a lot of meat dishes and all that stuff that's kind of going through all the years, is because that's what's always been there. It's the same thing with traditional values of men and women. It's something that's kind of always been there, and we're seeing it fade out, because the movements in society today that are supposed to be beneficial, it's called progressive, but it's actually the opposite. It's actually progressing away from nature. So I consider that digression. So yeah, overall, they're really taking us away from nature. So my experience with this is, I mean, I look at it and I remember when I was young and I thought about, in school, they would ask us what we wanted our dream job to be. And I would think to myself, I want to be a housewife. Like, that seems like the most fun job to have. Like, I get to be with my family. I get to be with my husband. I don't have to work. I can shop. I can do all this stuff. But it was always, so if I said that in class, they would all look at me like I was crazy. So what happened is, in school, they push, women to go get careers, go do it. And my mom would always tell me, never rely on a man. You need to be independent. You need to have your own career, your own money, and all of this stuff. And so that was the conditioning that I grew up in. And I started, pursuing that exact path. Graduated high school early. I moved out of my parents' house at 18. I got my first apartment. I started a business, and I just wasn't feeling fulfilled. And I was so confused. I couldn't understand why, until I actually realized that I was pursuing a masculine path, the path of the man. And that's never going to fulfill me as a woman when my desires and my life purpose is so different. So I found wisdom with studying the past, going back in the past, and really all the way going back to nature. If we think about the hunter and gatherer tribes, it's actually very similar. Instead of the man being the provider and making money, he would go provide the food while the woman raised the kids. So it's a mutual relationship. So back to you, Dan.
So what you're saying, I think there is a certain truth, in what you're saying, Megan. And, of course, again, if you look at hunter-gatherer societies, which is probably what we're it's nearer to what we're hardwired to be. And in that kind of a community, the men, for various reasons, and the women for also various reasons, they had to take care of the children. And the men would basically, let's say, go out and hunt for game, bring back the food. Women take care, or the women might do some gathering too, but and then everything is going to be relatively shared, because in that kind of a group, fairness is key. If things aren't fair, the whole group could fall apart. So women had a role to play, men had a role to play, and everything seemed to be natural and normal. And probably in terms of our hardwired equipment, that's true. And we're not really any different today than we, would have been when we were a hunter. There's still hunter-gatherer societies that exist. But what we live in is just so different. And I think, again, a lot of women and men are social, very different. I see it today, a very different socialization. When you go back to the 60s or the 70s, back in those days, again, in certain environments. Now, back in those days, you really didn't have the Christian community that evolved. It started evolving actually back in the, I went to college at University of California, Berkeley. And, I graduated in 1972. So I was right in the mix of, everything that was kind of going on and where all of these things were, right in your face. And yet at that time, there was starting to be sort of this religious revivalism. People would be around back in those days. They might be referred to pejoratively as Jesus freaks, that kind of thing. But that was just kind of the beginning of this tremendous expansion of the Christian, and I'm saying mostly fundamentalist or near fundamentalist kind of a community. And it blossomed into almost a parallel kind of a society in terms of what is considered to be moral and immoral relative to the urban areas of the country, which evolved in a very different fashion. I think it plays into the divide. The last thing I would say is, in terms of masculinity, when I was coming up in the world, we were socialized to be, and I think to some degree, we were socialized to be much more concerned about where we stood in the male hierarchy than anything else. In other words, how much do the other boys or men respect you? And of course, women back in those days, even though it was changing, the revolutions were taking place in the 60s and the 70s, and really rapidly. But it was still, there was a big part of the country and people who basically considered women, to be sort of almost like objects. They were objectified in various ways. And again, there would be a lot of pressure on teenagers and so on to become like that. So when you had that going on, it was probably led into, if you were a male and some are socialized that, today, but if you were taught that what's really important is your relationship to the other men, the other young men you're with, and women are important, but they're viewed as kind of subservient sexual objects in a lot of ways, objectified. That's not a great socialization, I would argue. And I do think these movements that came along really blasted that away as being so dominant. Believe me, it really was dominant, both in rural and in city areas. And I think that's really progressive, but I also think what you're saying is it really has a truth to it. That again, men and women biologically on average are different in terms of how they're constructed. And I'm very open-minded. I have no problem if a woman wants to express her masculinity, that's great, go ahead. I know, and if a man wants to express his femininity, that's fine. This is, but at the same time, I again, I'll say, I think there is a certain kind of general reality to what you're talking about.
Really, really great insight, Dan. I'm excited to come around and comment back on that. But Stacy, you are next.
Yeah, I love what you were talking about, Dan, with the male socialization and women as objects and all that. I hope we can circle around to something like that or do that in another meeting. But I wanted to talk about women. I think you were saying your mother told you that you should have your own career and be independent. And that is exactly what my mother told me. And so I think why were they telling us that there's something wrong with the male-female relationship? And I think it's kind of about some abusive. I'm not saying that women can't be abusive. I have a whole idea on toxic femininity as well. But I think that there has existed this, what Dan was saying, that women were seen as objects and subservient, and there needed to be, I mean, why? I don't know, but there needed to be a change and some equality so that women had more power. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Stacey. Really great points to address. So yeah, I think that definitely is something that happens. And I think it's just the same thing as propaganda to begin the switch. Because if you think about it, traditional women, and let's just say going back before men were socialized to view women as objects and to compete with their peers to whatever they would say, who could get the prettiest women or have the best bed experience or whatever. But before that, if you think about it, traditionally, I mean, women had it great. Like they were provided for back then. Men had so much buying power, so they could live a really fulfilled life. They had their own land, they had lots of children. So you have to think, like, why would women ever want to leave that? And typically they'd want to leave that to get over on the man because he wasn't providing like he should have. So circling back to submission, a lot of women, it scares them because they think it's foregoing a part of their individuality, but it's not. It's really joining in with somebody to become more than you would be apart. But the reason why submission has such a bad rep is because so many women have been conditioned to submit to men that they don't agree with and whose mission they can't get behind. And so there's there's no submission without trust. And a woman really has to trust the man that she submits to. And if he views her as an object, she'll never really respect him for that, because there's so much more. For a woman to submit, you got to provide for her, not just emotionally, but also financially. And I think that was probably something that was pushed by the government propaganda to try to shape. You have to change the men first, because if we really want to look at the quality of the women in society, all you have to do is really look at the quality of the men, because the men help shape the women. So it seems like the perfect way to take women away from their natural state, because if you start messing with the men, now the women don't want to be with these men who aren't complete in their masculinity. So sure, they're going to want to, hey, I want power now. I want this, I want that, and kind of break free. So that would be my assumption on kind of what happened. It seems like a lot of stuff like that went on, especially in the 1900s. I know, at least with education, a lot of this was in multiple scripts or multiple books of people who were a big part of the education movement, like William T. Harris, who was a commissioner of education in the 1800s, James Bryant Conant. They all wrote about how there was a revolutionary transformation of the school system between 1915 and 1930. And they wrote about how nobody actually realized what was going on because people were so focused on World War I and the Great Depression. So that goes to show that what's always happening is whenever we see these big wars going on and stuff and big social changes, there's always something sinister going on underneath to keep people distracted. So that's what I think about that. And then Dan made a good point in that we are different today, and we don't, obviously, most people don't live naturally. And I've learned to accept that. And I've instead made my mission, instead of changing the way things already are, it's really about creating new. So my hopes in sharing these ideas are that, this is what I'm doing with my life. So if it inspires other people, then that's great, because now we have other strong families that come together and build a similar vision, and we live that out in our lives. So if somebody wants to be a part of it and live that way, by all means join us. But if not, then that's fine too. So I guess it's not even a matter of changing the way things are now. It's a matter of creating a new avenue for people who want to revert back to how we lived naturally. Okay, back to you, Stacy.
You know, I'm going to yield to Alex and take my turn after Alex.
Okay, awesome. Alex.
Yeah, so I was wondering, you use this argument that if it's natural, this is something we should attempt to emulate. But I was wondering if you could provide more clarity on when you think that natural living ended. Was it 1,000 years ago, 2,000, 5,000, 15,000 years ago? When was it?
Okay, great. Stacy, go ahead.
Well, that's a quick answer if you wanted to answer that first.
Sure. So when exactly natural living ended? As soon as people stopped eating raw meat, started eating cooked foods, processed foods, and started, yeah, I would say at that point, as soon as the first person started cooking food, they started, because cooking is literally denaturing. That's when they moved away from nature. And it's kind of like, the way I look at it is, I think of nature as nature is the way to live. In nature, everything is perfect. And as soon as we stray away from nature, even if it's like 5%, all these problems start compounding on top of each other. Okay. That is all. Unless, did that answer, Alex?
Yeah, I was hoping if you could provide a year or like a time scale. I don't know when people started cooking their food, but I imagine it's quite a long time ago.
Yeah, I'd probably say a million something years ago. Something, it was way back, but that would be the very beginning. And then of course it escalates because they start cooking, they start gathering into civilization, and they start, you know, creating not that housing is unnatural because they would create some kind of shelter, but it expedites, it compounds on top of each other.
Okay, I wanted to, that really struck a chord with me, Megan, when you said that if the man is not respecting the woman or doing something, then how can she submit and have that role with the man? And whoa, did that strike a chord with me? It's yeah, I can see having the role of the woman in the house and doing those things, if the man held up his end of the bargain and treated me well. And I'm sure that that's a culturalization thing, the way that we're all brought up, which ties into another idea that I have had presented, that we need to understand what is, you know, it's actually along the lines of this. What is correct femininity and what is correct masculinity? It ties right in here. And I would have to say, I can agree with you much more if I felt like there was some honorable way for men to behave with women, and I haven't seen it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. That's a really great point, Stacey. Dan, go ahead.
Well, okay, so, you know, kind of picking up on that, and I, you know, so and what you were saying, Megan. So first, as humanity has evolved, you know, and populations have exploded, right, over time. And you know, you had, you know, a lot of people say, well, okay, 10,000 years ago, we started with agriculture, led to, you know, surplus food supplies, which then allowed for a division of labor, et cetera, you know, and things have moved on, you know, and again, we had in Europe, you know, around 1750, the kickoff of the Industrial Revolution, which really led to tremendous increases in population and way of life. We're at a it's a strange kind, you know, and given the way I kind of think about things and notice things, it appears at this point in time that given the population pressures and the density of living, you know, if you live out in a certain rural area that's viable, And you know, I remember when I sometimes travel to some relatives who lived out in kind of a rural area of Ohio. And it was, you know, kind of an agricultural type community. You had towns and everything, but it was, people were not all over each other, and they were very respectful. You know, you could leave your doors open. Coming from an urban area, no, you know, you're not leaving your door open. Even, you know, that isn't going to happen. And so as things evolved, and the population has expanded, I think it's affected gender quite a bit, because in a certain kind of a way, again, I go back to what I said, back in until about 1974 or so, you know, homosexuality and any other kind of sexual preference deviation from heterosexual reproduction, you know, sex for having children, was defined as being a mental health disorder. You were sick, you know, kind of a thing. Now, as time, and there was lots of oppression, obviously, all the way around, including, of course, women were trapped in a lot of situations where the man that they were, say, married to, or their, you know, would be treating them in a kind of abusive, authoritarian fashion. And so there was a tremendous need on the part of so many people to break free. And what happened in the, you know, 60s and the 70s was, that's what happened. Now, as time has gone on, you see today, and as the economy has evolved, for, you know, in certain ways which are very unfortunate, our population today is not so much into the way things used to be. You know, in other words, reproducing, having children is not easy. It's not really incentivized anymore. And so anything that, you know, again, like say sexual preferences that take people away from heterosexual reproduction, you know, type of nuclear family and so on, have been allowed to kind of get a lot of support in the culture. And I think it's a very notable phenomenon. And today in the United States, it's just kind of, you know, it's everywhere. And I think that there's not much of a chance at this point in time, probably going back to what there was. You know, you could live in certain communities in the United States, and you could have, you know, a lot of times it might be centered around a church or some sort of a community place where people will live in a very similar way to what they once did. But today, and you can say people are lonely, or a lot of people are lonely, as you were, you know, the stereotype, a woman is living with her little lapdog, you know, someplace, and you know, it may not be wonderful in a lot of ways, but I think that, you know, the change in the ways that men and women are and have been, it's been quite radical, and I don't think it could go back to what there was at one point in time. And you know, I a lot of times when today, because you know I'm older, obviously, and all of that, and you know, I'll have experiences with younger people, women, and I have to be pretty careful as to, you know, what I say, or, you know, you know, and again, in a place like Chicago, there's a lot of sensitivity about identities and so on, you know, the way the culture is. And I don't see this really returning to what it once was. And what it once was, and, you know, back in the 1950s, for example, the population in the United States was maybe 150 million. Today we are at 330 million. You know, there's a lot of people and not that great of an economy to support everybody. And so young people coming up today are confronted with, how am I going to have my need for my sexual needs, my needs for affection, and you know, all of these, how am I going to get that taken care of in the kind of environment we live? And I think it's a significant dynamic. I wonder what are your thoughts about all of that?
Yeah, super interesting points, Dan. Before I answer that, I do want to ask Ilya or Michael if you guys have anything that you want to add. If not, that's okay. No? Okay, Ilya.
No, I want to listen to the answer.
Okay, so I will go ahead and respond to that. So first I want to talk about vetting a man, and maybe this is something Stacy will appreciate, because I agree with you. We talk about submission and stuff to just any general man out there. It's kind of like, why would I do that? But how do you know when to submit to the right man, and how can you vet a right man? How can you tell? And honestly, so I definitely don't believe all men are bad. I think there's a lot of great men out there. We just have to find them. And when we're great women, we will find them too. It's just like anybody who says a statement, oh, all women are trash, all men are trash. It's just an ignorant statement, because it's not true. They are there, but how do you find and how do you sense that? So the way from experience in studying, I found that, you know, a man with the provider mindset will want to provide. He'll be very, you know, motivated to do whatever it takes financially to make both of the dreams happen. He'll also court the woman rather than date her, so to say, because a lot of times people dating now is just casual sex for people, but a genuine man is going to court. So you'll be able to tell early on. There's different things you can always ask too. What I've learned is, you know, once a man starts kind of courting you and talking to you, you can ask, you know, what attracted you to me? And if he's giving some answer like, oh, your body and all this stuff, he's actually, that's not the answer you want to look for. Obviously, it's something like, you know, something about this quality of you I really see, you know, I really need somebody like that in my life, and so on and so forth. So if what happens is for young women, the education needs to be out there and taught to them. How do you vet a man? How do you find a good man that will take care of you, that won't abuse you, that'll really protect you? That way you can totally submit to him. And of course, there's going to be some parts he services you just as, you know, you service him. So, and that education is probably never going to come from some kind of government funded public school system, but it can come from us as parents or future parents, and how we be examples for our future kids and how we teach them too. So, no, that is really important. So no woman should ever submit to the man until he's proven himself to her. And of course, it goes both ways, because a man who has kind of like a king conscious energy will actually, he's gonna want a queen conscious woman as well. So it goes both ways. Okay, so then the next question was kind of commenting on what Dan had said. So yeah, I definitely agree. There's a massive cultural shift and kind of indifference, and I don't think either that the people right now, at least, will go back to how we lived. That's the entire game of it all. That's the big picture. The real people who are behind this, Edward Bernays, he's a really interesting person to look into. He was the propagandist behind pretty much actually Nazi Germany, all of that. Dan's smiling, so Dan's probably heard of him. But he wrote something. He wrote that there's actually a very, very small number of people, like small enough that we can count them on one hand, who are running the show behind the wires. Like they're behind the scenes, you know, running the show. And I really do, I believe that. And their whole game is keep people away from nature, keep them focused on useless things that don't matter, because no human can be fulfilled until they're in line with nature. And until we're in line with nature, there's always going to be a void that's missing. And that's why that's all of this really ties in together, but that's why people are constantly looking for something outside of themselves, because that void is missing, and it only comes in nature. Nature is it's like the straight and narrow path in the Bible. The narrow path is nature, and any deviation just compounds and takes you away from that. So I think that that was all I wanted to comment on for now. Let me think if there's anything else I wanted to add. So yeah, I think that's it for now. Well, we're actually getting close to time, so I'll go to Stacy, and then after that, we'll go ahead and move into closing remarks.
These should be pretty quick. Have you found one of those men? Have you vetted men and found one? And two, who were the 5 people or the people on one hand that Edward said were in?
Great question. So I'm in a vetting process right now, I will say. So yeah, but I can talk about more, more of that in the future. And then who are the people that are, I don't know, actually. I don't think they'd ever reveal themselves. A lot of people are like, oh, it's Rockefeller, it's Bill Gates. I don't believe that. They're just frontmen. The real people who are controlling this are probably on some island somewhere that doesn't even exist on the map. They would never reveal themselves because they know that there's always people who are awake. But the way that I look at it is they actually don't really have any power other than not what's perceived, because they have people kind of locked into this game of life. People are completely lost on what the purpose of life really is. But the second somebody breaks out of that, all the power is back to them, because once you're in tune with who you are, nobody can ever take that away from you. So it's not hopeless. But I really think the solution is just we have to do the best in our own lives to initiate change. And we can't really change the world, but we can change our world. And in a sense, by changing our world, it could have an impact that does change the world. So we'll go ahead and move into closing remarks now. Would anybody like to start us off?
I can.
Okay, sure. Go ahead, Stacey.
That was super. I could go for another hour. I love this, and it's kind of in my wheelhouse too. And just thank you very much, and thank everybody. I thank everybody else for contributing. It was a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you so much, Stacey, for your contributions. We'll go over to Dan. Would you like to share your closing remarks?
Yeah, and again, Megan, I definitely appreciate the topics you introduced because it is interesting, kind of stuff. So, I guess I would say that, in academia these days, or, evolutionary psychology, has become a pretty standard subject. And the way that they look at things, I think, is an interesting take on relationships between men and women. And the other thing is that you see, again, from a mental health standpoint, well, back at one point in time, in terms of addictions, alcohol and then different kind of drug addictions were the centerpiece of addiction work. But as things changed, as the culture changed, sexually, etc., the relations between men and women, we at a certain point started, sexual addiction became a big topic, in the mental health world. And again, and then of course, with the internet and all the pornography and the relative freedom that the controllers allow, again, back in the 1950s or 60s, or in those days, pornography was tightly controlled. You would not normally be exposed to anything even resembling the kind of pornographic material that's all over the place and has been for some time now. But as relationships have changed and everything has changed, they have allowed a tremendous input and freedom, the sexual freedom, and out of that you get a lot of people very addicted, and a lot of young men these days, that's a big part of their lives, is pornography. And in a country like Japan, they've even had these surveys where, let's say young men in their 20s, I can't remember what the percent is, but a significant percentage, they don't even want to have a relationship with a woman in the traditional way. And that's partly because of economic dynamics and other things. And I think that just going back at the one of the final points I made is, I don't think the genie's out of the bottle, the cultural genie's out of the bottle all over the world. And I don't think we have much of a chance to go back to what it once was. And a lot of what it once was much more stable than anything you have going on today. And I appreciate your fondness for something like that.
Thank you so much, Dan. Yeah, super great points again. You always have wonderful insight to share. And oh, something else too. You should definitely consider sharing one of your ideas on COVID-19 biowarfare too with us. I'd be interested to hear that. So if you do, I guess you could get with either Stacy or I if you want to share an idea.
Yeah. I talked about it earlier with Stacy, and not in a very formal way like a presentation, but I would be happy to talk about it actually. But it's not a very popular topic, but I would be happy to talk about it.
Yeah, I think it'd be super fascinating. Okay, great. So Ilya, would you like to share your closing remarks?
Yeah, so feminism is really about having the freedom to be anybody that the person wants, about equal opportunity. And the first wave was about fighting legal inequalities. And I think in certain countries, especially Muslim countries, there is a lot of suffering, and because of the lack of rights and opportunities for women, and the work is still a lot of work to be done, and that in industrial societies that there it makes more sense to have freedom, because it's not, I mean, that path is not necessarily like the most optimal with, I mean, with, I mean, overpopulation, overfishing, all of those. I mean, humanity is already, I mean, getting too big for this planet. Maybe there are other paths forward, but that those are my thoughts.
Thank you so much for sharing, Ilya. Alex, would you like to share your closing remarks?
Yeah, I think, well, yeah, thanks for the discussion. I enjoyed it. I think that it's good that such frameworks work for individual people and on an individual basis. But like Ilya said, there's never been more people on Earth than there are right now. And so the same old solutions to these problems, I can't see as being applicable to this number of people. And so I think maximizing the ability of somebody to make decisions over their own lives and have authority to take themselves out of bad situations in the ways that they see fit is sort of the main answer, even though it's not nearly as specific as a framework like you outlined. But yeah, thanks for the discussion. And Dan, I would also be interested in hearing such a talk.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Michael, would you like to share any remarks?
Well, it's just feels complicated, like different strokes for different folks, basically. So I can see some instances where your thesis might be really applicable, and then in other cases with other people, it doesn't apply nearly so much.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael. So my closing remark now, couple things to say before I get into the real closing remarks. So as far as the population goes, I don't believe the population is what we're told. So that can be another discussion. And I also do believe, like Ilya had mentioned, and Michael, and I think kind of all of us genuinely agree, is that it's all about individual choice. And I totally agree with that too. If somebody wants to live the lifestyle of a feminist, and that's fine. They can do whatever they want to do. If a woman wants to marry a woman, a man wants to marry a man, that's fine. You do you. How you live your life doesn't affect me. I'll never judge somebody for that. But the issue comes when you have a movement like feminism that's projecting these ideals on young women. It's propagandizing people, and I want people to see both sides of the story is really the thing. It's that way they can really make a decision for themselves on how they want to live. And this is where it really goes in. So think about this, an example of two different women. So the first woman, we'll call her Karen. So she's 45 years old, and she got her degree, her successful degree. She works a corporate job, 9 to 5, and she has a studio apartment in the city. She lives alone. You know, she slept around with a bunch of guys her entire life. She was married at one point, but it didn't last. They got divorced, and now she lives alone in her studio apartment. And it's kind of like a network society in that, you know, she doesn't really know anybody in there, although there's 50 to 100 people in her building, and none of them know her. But hey, she has her cat and her dog, and so she comes home from work and she eats pizza or whatever, watches Netflix, and maybe scrolls on Facebook for a little bit, and then she goes to sleep, and she gets up and she does the same thing again, and that's her life. And then you have another woman, we'll call her Brittany. So Brittany married pretty young, and Brittany, you know, she married a man, a proven man, a man that she really could see her life playing out with, a man she could submit to, and they have a big family together. They have 6 kids, and he provides financially. They have a whole estate, their own land, and she really gets to focus not only on raising the kids, but because she doesn't have to work, she has all the time to use her feminine creativity and write or pursue her passions. And, you know, they've really created a beautiful estate together. And not only that, but they have a legacy that they live on. They have their family and their mission and tangent together. So my question would be is just think about which one of those women, Karen versus Brittany, lives a higher quality life. All right. So the last thing before we end is just taking another vote. So just show of hands, who is in support of this idea? Okay, Stacy, myself, and then we have Dan, who's kind of half and half, and Michael's kind of half and half as well. And Alex and Ilya are either abstaining or do not agree. So this idea is in Agora. If you would like to support it, I will put the link in the chat as well. And that just about wraps up our meeting for tonight. So thanks to everybody for coming out, and for our viewers and listeners, if you'd like this idea, don't forget to support it in agora-alp.org. In Agora, you'll also find information for our upcoming meetings. And last but not least, please like our page and join our group on Facebook, which is found on facebook.com/group/citizens assembly.